You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. First of all, what do you make of the testimony of Donald Williams? I want to play some of that right now. Watch this.
So when I first arrived on the scene, Mr. Floyd was vocalizing his sorriness and his pain and his distress that he was going through. The more that the knee was blocked on his neck and shimmies that were going on, the more you seen Floyd fade away and slowly fade away, and like the fish in a bag, you seen his eyes slowly, pale out and again slowly roll to the back of his eyes. And so this is what I seen, this is what I heard, and that's how, what it was. Like, he was going through distress because of the knee, and he vocalized it that I can't breathe, I need to get up, and I'm sorry. And his eyes slowly rolled to the back of his head. You seen the blood coming out of his nose. You heard him tell him before he stopped speaking that my stomach hurts. And those, most of the time, is the last vowel movement of your life. So from there on, he was lifeless. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't have no life in him, no more on his body movements.
During that time period, did you notice anything about his breathing that was significant to you?
Yes, just like in MMA, you could tell when someone gets tired, or you could tell when someone's getting choked out or things like that. His breathing was getting tremendously heavy and tremendously harder for him to breathe, and you actually could hear him. You could see him struggling to actually gasp for air while he was trying to breathe, and he barely could move while he was trying to get air.
As you were standing there, did others gather around?
Correct. At the moment, I was the most vocalist person out there pleading for Floyd's life because I felt like it was definitely in the wrong. And there was, at one point in time, a medic came on scene, and she spoke on checking pulse, what made me even go even more harder because I heard it, and then I registered it, and like, oh, you do need to check his pulse. Oh, he is not moving. Like, oh, you just killed this man, And so her expertise was like, look, he's fading away. You need to check.
Folks, that was Donald Williams, of course, a professional mixed martial arts fighter who was heard on the video yelling at the cops there. Strong testimony there, Bernarda.
Absolutely. Donald Williams gave one of the strongest testimony that I've seen in the 16 years that I was a prosecutor. Donald Williams comes off as credible and likable, that you can trust him. You can trust him. You believe what he is saying. And with that, think about the most important word that we heard from there is that, number one, he was like a fish out of a bag of water. In addition to that, Derek Chauvin was shimmying on the neck of George Floyd. Shimmying is going to be a word that's going to be used repeatedly during closing arguments. And I think that is one that the jury's going to be able to accept.
So The next phase here, obviously, if you're the defense, they want to make this all about drug use. They want the jury to believe that George Floyd died because of drugs in his system. That's what their whole plan is.
Absolutely, Roland, because what happens is that in any homicide case, you have to prove manner and cause of death. Manner of death has to be homicide. And then the cause of death has to be as a result of the actions of the defendant. If you do not prove manner of death being homicide, if you do not prove that Derek Chauvin was the one who actually caused the death of George Floyd, then you cannot find him guilty of any of the 3 charges. So that is the focus that Eric Nelson is going to have to take if he has any chance in trying to get Derek Chauvin acquitted. But in the end, like was emphasized by the prosecutor, George Floyd was on drugs for years, and he was walking around, and without any issue did he die during that time. It wasn't until May 25th when Derek Chauvin put his knee on the neck of George Floyd for 9 minutes and 29 seconds is that he actually died.
Bernardo Villanova, we certainly appreciate it, Senior Trial Counsel for the Joey Jackson Law Firm. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me, Roland.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Opening arguments and testimony began today in the trial of former Minneapolis cop Derek Chauvin, the man, of course, on trial for killing George Floyd. Prosecutors said during opening statements that Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's head and neck for 4 minutes and 45 seconds as Floyd cried out for help, stayed on his neck as Floyd failed and had seizures for 53 seconds, and then remained on a non-responsive Floyd for another 3 minutes and 51 seconds. This is an update to the 8 minutes and 46 seconds initially quoted. The defense team focused on Floyd's alleged drug use and his resistance to the arresting officers. Here is what took place today.
We plan to prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Mr. Chauvin was anything other than innocent on May 25th of 2020. And our second objective, ladies and gentlemen, is to bring you the evidence. And you will be able to hear Mr. Floyd saying, "Please, I can't breathe. Please, man, please." In this 9 minutes and 29 seconds, you will see that as Mr. Floyd is handcuffed there on the ground, he is verbalizing 27 times, you will hear. In the 4 minutes and 45 seconds, "I can't breathe. Please, I can't breathe." You will see that Mr. Chauvin is kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck and back. He has one knee on his neck, and the knee on his back is intermittently off and on his back, as you will be able to see for yourself in the video footage. You will hear Mr. Floyd as he's crying out. You hear him at some point cry out for his mother when he's being squeezed there. He's very close to his mother, you will learn. You will hear him say, "Tell my kids I love them." You will hear him say about his fear of dying, he says, "I'll probably die this way. I'm through. They're going to kill me. They're going to kill me, man." You will hear him crying out, and you will hear him cry out in pain.
Mr. Chauvin asked the officers, "Is he under arrest?" Yes. And then Officer Chauvin began to assist them in their efforts to get him into the squad car. You will see that 3 Minneapolis police officers could not overcome the strength of Mr. Floyd. Mr. Chauvin stands 5'9", 140 pounds. Mr. Floyd is 6'3", weighs 223 pounds. As the struggle continues, you will see and hear both what Mr. Floyd was saying to the officers and the officers' responses to him. Mr. Floyd does end up on the street and appeared to continue to struggle to these officers, so much so that they considered applying what's called the maximal restraint technique. It used to be called the hobble or the hog tie. Mr. Chauvin used his knee to pin Mr. Floyd's left shoulder blade and back to the ground, and his right knee to pin Mr. Floyd's left arm to the ground. Officer King was placed below Mr. Floyd's buttocks, and Officer Lane was at the feet. And you will see and hear them continue to struggle with Mr. Floyd as he's attempting to kick. The evidence will show that Mr. Floyd died of a cardiac arrhythmia that occurred as a result of hypertension, his coronary disease, the ingestion of methamphetamine and fentanyl, and the adrenaline flowing through his body, all of which acted to further compromise an already compromised heart. At the conclusion of this evidence, you will be instructed as to the law, the elements of the offense, and the court will give you detailed instructions on what you must find to convict Mr. Chauvin of these charges. But when you review the actual evidence, and when you hear the law and apply reason and common sense, there will only be one just verdict, and that is to find Mr. Chauvin not guilty.
Joining me now is Bernardo Villalona, Senior Trial Counsel for the Joey Jackson Law Firm in New York. Certainly glad to have you here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. First of all, your assessment of today's first day of this trial.
Thank you for having me, Roland. So today is the day that we've been waiting for so long. Since May 25th of 2020, we've been waiting for this trial to start. And we heard and got a preview of what this trial is going to entail by listening to the opening statements by the prosecution as well as from the defense. The prosecution, who did an opening about 1 hour long, did do a good job emphasizing that for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, actually for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, that Derek Chauvin was on the neck of George Floyd. Emphasizing also that your eyes don't lie, that you can believe your eyes. And when you look into that, you can see the intent of Derek Chauvin in taking away the life, the breath of George Floyd. From the defense perspective, actually the defense also did a good job. And the defense did a good job because they did a good job with the facts that they were dealt. They focused on reasonable doubt. They focused on reminding the jury that this case is not just about a video. And the way that they did it in saying that over 50 law enforcement people were working on this case, over 50,000 pages were involved, bait stamped in this case. And taking that into account goes to show you that even with all those pages and also all those people helping out, that it was more than a video. It wasn't a quick judgment that on that day he was culpable. So taking that all into account, I think that both sides actually did have a good day in terms of laying out the opening statement. So now let's see where we're going to go with it.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans distributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. More witnesses took the stand today in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, including first of all, of course, he's the one charged with murdering George Floyd, folks. Riveting their testimony, including a 9-year-old who testified and 2 high school seniors. Here's what took place.
At some point, did you make a 911 call?
That is correct. I did call the police on the police.
Right. And why did you do that?
Because I believe I witnessed a murder.
All right. So if we can at this point, then play Exhibit 20.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
Officer 987 killed a citizen in front of a Chicago store. He just pretty much just killed this guy that wasn't resisting arrest. He had his knee on the dude's neck the whole time, Officer 987. The man went stopped breathing. He wasn't resisting arrest or nothing. He was already in handcuffs. They pretty much just killed the dude. I don't even know if he's dead for sure, but he was not responsible when the ambulance just came and got him. And the officer that was just out here left, the one that actually just murdered the kid in front of everybody on 38th in Chicago.
Okay. Would you like to speak with the sergeant?
Yeah, like that was bogus what they just did to this man. He was unresponsive. He wasn't resisting arrest or any of it.
Okay, let me get you over to the desk. You can request to speak with the sergeant, okay?
Yeah, and I'm sitting here talking with another off-duty firefighter that just sat here and watched it in front of us as well.
Okay.
And she told him to check the man's pulse, but they wouldn't even check the pulse.
Okay, 1 second.
I have reached the city of Minneapolis to reach someone in our property crimes division.
Y'all murderers, bro. Y'all murderers, Kyle. You gonna kill yourself. I already know it. 2 more years. You gonna shoot yourself. Murderers, bro. Y'all niggas is murderers, bro. Minneapolis Third Precinct.
Hey, it's dispatch.
Yeah, man. So I want to speak to a supervisor. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he wants to speak with a supervisor relating to 320's called cup food.
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad. I look at my brothers. I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all black. I have a black father. I have a black brother. I have black friends. And I look at that and I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights. I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life. But it's like, it's not what I should have done. It's what he should have done.
When you walked past the squad car there, did you see anything happening there on the ground as you were walking towards Cup Foods with your cousin?
Yes, I see a man on the ground and I see a cop kneeling down on him.
Was there anything about the scene that you didn't want your cousin to see?
Yes.
And what was that?
A man terrified, scared, begging for his life.
Is that why you directed your cousin to going into Cup Foods?
Yes.
And then when you saw what was happening there at the scene, what was it about the scene that caused you to come back?
It wasn't right. He was suffering. He was in pain.
Let me stop you there for just a second, Darnell. And so when you say, first of all, he, are you referring to the person you come to know as George Floyd?
Yes.
Did you know anything about Mr. George Floyd before May 25th?
No.
Had you ever met him before?
No.
Ever seen him before to your knowledge?
No.
So when you came back to this scene here that we can see in Exhibit 16, What did you do when you first got there and we see where you're standing? What did you do?
I pulled out my phone.
And what were you doing to pull out your phone?
Recording and capturing what I was seeing.
So tell the jury what you observed, what you heard when you stopped to look at what was happening there at the scene.
I heard George Floyd saying, I can't breathe, please get off of me. I can't breathe. He cried for his mom. He was in pain. It seemed like he knew. It seemed like he knew it was over for him. He was terrified. He was suffering. This was a cry for help.
Joining us right now is attorney Yodita Welde. Of course, she also is with America's Most Wanted. This was a unbelievable day of testimony, Yodita, all across the board. To hear these 3 minors testify, having to also relive that video, describing what took place. But the mixed martial arts fighter, he was asked point blank, why'd you call the cops? And he said, because I felt I witnessed a murder.
Yeah. You know, the prosecution's starting really strong. They had a strong day yesterday. They're continuing to have a strong case by putting up these bystanders who in real time can show these jurors what they experience and what they continue to experience because of that traumatic day. But I will say with the martial mix expert or fact witness, that is Mr. Williams, he didn't have a great cross-examination. You could see that he was really getting frustrated, combative, defensive. Makes me actually question whether the prosecutors actually warned these witnesses that that is something to expect. But what that tape did, that 911 call being played for the jury, he may not have been as effective today in his testimony, but that 911 call said everything he needed to say to those jurors that he couldn't say on that stand. So still very powerful.
This is, I mean, obviously it is very hard for folks to relive this, and also them playing the video of different angles for us to actually see that Derek Chauvin was not the only officer putting his weight on the body of George Floyd. Yeah. Seeing these different angles and hearing people's, again, real-time narration really puts things into perspective for some of these jurors who actually said that they never actually seen the video in full. Some have never seen it at all. Some only saw parts of it. So this is definitely eye-opening for them. But if you remember the 911 dispatcher, she was able to walk the jurors through this video that no one had seen in the public. It was perched up. It was a police camera that was across the street from Cup Foods. And for her to say, I thought that the video had frozen. That's how long they were on George Floyd. That she had to do something that was completely out of the norm for a 911 dispatcher. And that was to call a supervisor and say something is going on. So for her, someone who's never had police training, any type of use of force training, to know that common sense and reason tells her something is off about this video, that's what the jurors can do. This is, of course, when you talk about, again, the way the prosecutors are approaching this, very methodical. And look, if you're a prosecutor, you want to lead with your strongest people. You don't want to sort of just, meander into this. Look, they've had a strong 2 days, and you talk about putting the defense on the defense. That certainly has been the case. Yeah, I mean, the defense is always going to have an uphill battle, but certainly in this case, because of that video. So the prosecutors, like you said, start strong. And that's what was a little confusing when they started with the 911 dispatcher. You thought that they might have started with a family member or maybe one of those younger minor bystanders. But I see why they did it now. She had something powerful to say, and it's the start of a chain of events from that day. But they want to play that tape as much as possible, and they're getting to do that through the bystanders who were recording from different angles. So as many times as they could start that video and stop it frame by frame and have a witness testify to what they're watching, they are ingraining in these jurors' minds what this was like on that day for not only George Floyd, but for these bystanders too. So if I were the prosecutor, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry. If I were the prosecutor, I was gonna say that is the goal. Keep playing that video from every single angle as much as possible. The defense has nothing
to contradict that video. They can try and poke holes. That's what they're doing. That's their job, to muddy the waters. But there is no combating that video in real time to watch what it is that's happening to George Floyd. That, again, the defense said in their opening statements for the jurors to use their common sense and reasoning. When you look at that video, you don't need training to know that common sense and reasoning says that what was happening to George Floyd was absolutely unreasonable and excessive.
But on that particular point, here's the other piece, because I go back to the Rodney King trial. The defense attacked the video because it was only one angle. Well, if you look at the video in terms of the positioning, not really on his neck. No. In this case, you've got multiple videos, multiple angles, and so your defense, you got to figure out, if you're going to try to discredit the video, you're not got to discredit all of them from different angles as opposed to what we've seen in previous trials.
But even if they try to discredit the angles, you have the actual witnesses testifying to what it is in the video. So what the prosecutors are doing, and they should be doing this, is putting on all these witnesses to also supplement what it is that they're watching. So you can't discount them, especially those younger kids. The ones that were minors at the time, the 17, the 18-year-olds, it's really hard for the defense to go on the attack and cross-examine them, right? These are people who are still suffering, who still think about that day. One of them said they can't even walk down that street anymore. It would look very bad on the part of the defense to try and attack them. It's their job, but not a good look in front of the jury.
All right, then. Your need to well day. We appreciate it. Thank you so very much. We'll keep, of course, we're streaming this trial every single day. Folks can watch it on our YouTube channel, Facebook and Twitter accounts as well to keep up with what's going on. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have, you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it. Please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Witness testimony and surveillance video was shown today in the Derek Chauvin murder trial in Minneapolis. Of course, it provided the first look at George Floyd's actions inside Cup Foods before his death. It was from inside the store. Shows Floyd casually walking into Cup Foods, roll it please, and talking with customers and employees. We also heard from the store clerk and others who witnessed the murder. Guys, y'all can roll the video. We're going to talk over it. Monique, I want to start with you. You've been following the trial. Just your assessment of what happened today.
The evidence was devastating. The witness testimony was certainly painful to listen to. I've been in trials of my own where I found myself praying for my witnesses, that we all would end up making it through and that nobody would collapse on the stand and that I would keep it together and do my job at the table. And I found myself doing that today, even though I'm not there, not in the trial. Even one of the tweets that I tweeted today was "Help him, Holy Ghost," because when we saw the prosecution's witnesses time after time be racked with guilt and then ultimately just collapse in tears watching the evidence be put before the jury, I can only imagine what the jury's reaction is to these things. But the other thing that I would say is that the prosecution is doing an almost seamless job on presentation of evidence and witnesses and strategy. They pulled the sting today. I'm sure Scott will explain after I'm sorry, I have to cut out early today what that means. But when you know that there's bad evidence that's going to come at some point and you want to control that narrative and present that evidence yourself before anybody else gets a chance to, they started yesterday with what really matters, the relevant evidence about how George Floyd did not need to die. They backed up today. So they went in reverse chronology and explained what happened before he ended up on the ground outside. And then they ended, with the MPD technician coming and all of that body cam footage coming in. And all I was thinking in my head the whole time I was watching that footage is they ought to rot in hell. They ought to rot in hell. They ought to rot in hell. I mean, convictions really are not good enough for what we saw today.
Scott, your assessment.
Yeah, I agree with Monique. The sting they pulled out today, what Monique was talking about, was the store clerk that actually called the police. I actually didn't know there were that many counterfeit bills coming through that community. I mean, it's like this was the second one. But he said he thought that George Floyd was high, although he could have a conversation with him. And he called the police because he had this counterfeit bill. Turns out that George Floyd did have drugs in his system, but that's part of the defense. The prosecution put that witness on today to take the sting out of that, to add credibility to their case, to the jury, saying, this jury, I'm going to give you all the facts, not just some of the facts. I'm not going to hide anything from you. So when you hear this from the defense, you will have heard it already. But the emotional testimony, and it's early, is expected. But what you got today, the power of the testimony was reflected in how the video manifested emotionally with all of these people who observed this. Their helplessness, for one, but more importantly, that they watched the life force being taken away from this black man under the knee of the defendant and the police. And you don't have many videos like that. I've told you before, Roland, the power of this video and why you had protests all over the world was the slowly left, the life force left this man's body and you observed it. It wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't him running and getting shot in the back. No, this 9 minutes was just grueling and awful. And you heard a lot of that on the stand. It's an excellent start for the prosecution, but know the experts are coming and the cause of death is going to be hotly debated and litigated. And that's really going to be the turnkey or the most important part of this case. Who are the experts and who does the jury believe?
Robert.
Was it the drugs and fentanyl and hypertension that killed him? Or is it but for the police, the drugs and the health issues don't really matter because but for the police triggering those ramifications of his health issue, is that what killed him? But for the police. Look for that phraseology as we carry on this trial.
Robert.
There's an odd thing that the defense is doing is a kind of divergent, bifurcated defense. One is this idea of the buck defense, where George Floyd was this 6'5", monstrous, towering individual, athlete, hopping up on drugs, a super soldier, flipping over cars, juggling buildings, all that. And so, of course, it took a small 5'9", very weak officer. We had to hold him down. We had to put our knee on his neck. There was no other way for us to contain him. The buck defense. I've been using it since slavery to talk about black men. But then they have a second defense, which is what Scott was just mentioning, which is kind of an eggshell defense, saying that George Floyd was so sick, so weak, so decrepit, so riddled with drugs that he would have died at that exact same place at that exact same time with no intervention from the officers, that he was a person in such poor physical condition, such poor health, that there was nothing that the officer did that contributed to his death, that it was simply the forces of nature and the officer just happened to be there at that time. So they're arguing in two different directions at the same time. So what you saw the prosecution do today is, as Scott and Monique said, try to take the sting out of that second defense, the sting out of that idea of him simply being so weak and decrepit and riddled with drugs and alcohol that he was going to just keel over and die, taking a culpability away from the officer. I think the next thing they will have to do is attack that buck defense and the idea that he's somehow posed a threat, because it's a nonsense argument. And the fact that in America you can have this on video, have a half dozen or more witnesses witness something, talk about this for a year, and still we're on pins and needles as to if there will be a conviction, shows you just how broken the criminal justice system is. God forbid you get killed by the police, you don't have a film crew there with you to chronicle what happened. God forbid you get killed by the police, you don't have an international movement that sparks protests in Sydney, Australia, and Shanghai, China, and everywhere else around the world, because if you're just a regular individual who gets killed by the police, if these officers can't get convicted for this, I'm not sure what you would have to do to get convicted for killing a black man in America.
Folks, we're going to play some of the testimony that took place today in the Derek Chauvin murder trial. Here it is.
I'm going to pause here for a moment. The record should reflect 8:29:55. We saw you standing there with your hands on your head for a while, correct? Correct. What was going through your mind during that time period?
Disbelief and guilt.
Okay. Why guilt?
If I would have just not taken the bill, this could have been avoided.
We also saw another individual get pushed by an officer, correct?
Correct.
And what did you do after that happened?
I was just trying to calm him down, tell him to stand back.
Okay, so that takes us to the end of Exhibit 33. You were going back into the store.
Correct.
And so then did you just continue to work your shift?
Correct.
And so did you continue to work at Cup Foods as long as you could?
No.
Why not?
I didn't feel safe.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
I'm not trying to win. I'll get on the ground, anything. I'll get in the car. Man. He know it. He know it to Mr. Officer. Y'all hear me? Don't do me like that, man.
In the car.
Okay, can I talk to you, please?
Yes, you get in this car. We can talk.
I am claustrophobic.
I'm hearing you, but you're not working with me.
God, I'm claustrophobic.
Get in the car.
Man.
Get in the car.
Can you put me in the front? Please.
No, you're not getting in the front.
I'm claustrophobic, so I was
Get in the car.
Okay, man, okay? I'm not a bad guy, man.
Get in the car.
I'm not a bad guy. Man. Open my door. Please, officer. Please.
Sit.
Please.
Take a seat.
Please, man. Please. No,
take a seat.
I can't choke. I can't breathe, officer. Please. Please.
Fine.
My wrist, man. My wrist, man, please. I can't. And I'm on the ground. I'm on the ground. I'm on the ground, yo. I'm on the ground. I'm going down. I'm going down.
Get in the squad.
I'm going down. I'm not going to lose, man.
Bro, you gonna die of a heart attack, too, right? Get in the car.
I know I can't breathe.
Get in the car.
I can't go, man. I can't breathe.
Take a seat.
Please, man. Please listen to me.
Is he going to jail? He's under arrest right now for the forgery.
I'll tell you.
Can we figure out what's going on?
For what?
Take him out.
For what? Look at you. Thank you. Thank you.
Get him down on the ground. Yeah, on the ground. On the ground.
My God. Right.
You got your restraint. Hobble.
Can't breathe.
Okay.
Can't breathe.
I'll grab that. Once you get him.
Jesus. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Thank you.
I can't breathe.
Stop moving.
Mama.
Yeah,
Mama.
sit there.
Mama.
One of the front couches.
Mama.
On my right side bag.
Mama.
You're under arrest, guy.
All right. Oh my God.
So now you're going to jail.
I can't believe this. I can't believe this. I can't believe this. I can't believe this, man.
Can we stop it right here, please?
Mama, look.
Mr. McMahon, do you need a minute? just give you a moment, Mr. McGon. I'm not sure if there's water for you as well. Oh, if you need a break to get some water, let me know, and we can take a break. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may. Thank you.
You okay?
Yeah.
I know that this is difficult. Can you just explain sort of what you're feeling in this moment?
I feel helpless. I don't have a mama either, but I understand him. My mom died June 25th.
Scott, how does that testimony play to a jury?
Well, it's very emotional testimony for one thing. They took a break right after that. Okay, so the jury is going to be just as emotional as he is. He lost his mother. George Floyd didn't have a mother. And this witness and the other witnesses keep talking about how helpless they felt. And it's true. When the police are there and they got the guy down and you had a paramedic there, they couldn't help but they could see the life force leaving his body. And so his testimony is very powerful. But this case has a lot of different aspects to it. It's going to take like up to 30 days. So this is just one. The prosecutors have to keep that emotional level there for the next 20 or 30 days. We'll see. The real issue, though, with this witness is, could he finish and tell his story? The video tells part of it. What the video also shows with the police and this gentleman here is they just know discretion. They didn't care, and they didn't know how to deal with someone in mental or drug crisis, which is the biggest problem with the police force. There's just nothing there other than arrest and take them. They should have put him in the car and, despite his protest, just took him to the hospital, but they didn't care about it. So good testimony for the prosecution, but he told his story. But can that level of emotional connection with the jury, can they maintain it on a daily basis or weekly basis or through the end of the trial? They're going to try, no matter what, to do just that.
Robert?
Well, you know, it looks good for the prosecution currently, but I've learned not to judge cases at halftime, particularly in the first
exactly.
quarter.
No. We're not saying guilt or innocence. I'm just simply saying, what is it looking like from your perspective? How does that play to a jury right now? Not whether he's going to be guilty.
It plays well to a jury right now, but also there are portions of that I can see the defense will be using in their direct presentment of the facts. They will argue that they tried to peacefully put Mr. Floyd in the backseat of the car, that he resisted, that he pushed back, that they were simply trying to restrain him at the time, that they called for paramedics, that they followed the protocols as were taught to them as required by the department, and that despite the death being tragic, there was no criminality involved. If anything, there was recklessness involved. I think that's what will be their argument. And one of the issues that the prosecution is going to have to establish is the prong of intent, because people keep asking for a first-degree murder charge or conviction in this case. Well, the prosecution has to prove that there was an intent on the part of Officer Chauvin to kill Mr. Floyd, and they haven't presented evidence that would indicate that. And the defense is going to argue that this was just all a horrible accident because of Mr. Floyd's drug addiction, because of Mr. Floyd's alcohol consumption, because of Mr. Floyd's physical condition, and that it's not their fault because he resisted. That's going to be their defense. So I'm going to be looking for the prosecution pushing forward and pushing evidence that will show what the intent was and how they can establish that in this case. So those are things I'm looking out for.
All right, folks. Let's.
Yeah, you know, Roland, if I may, real quick, one other thing. The police are going to always argue one way, shape, or form. I didn't go there to kill George Floyd. I went there to arrest him. He died as a result of him stealing and resisting, but I didn't kill him. in the end, that's kind of going to be what the defense is going to be in a big way. And with the expert, they're going to argue that in closing. It's going to be a tough case to get a conviction here.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have, you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. You have the 5th day of the murder trial of Derek Chauvin and wrapped up the first week of testimony, this time from Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman, the head of the Minneapolis Police Department's homicide unit. He condemned Chauvin's actions, saying they were uncalled for. Here's some of what he said today in court.
I received a phone call from Sergeant Kluger, who was the mid-watch sergeant.
Do you recall what Sergeant Kluger, let me back up. Did Sergeant Kluger give you information that you relied upon to take further steps in your duties that night?
Yes.
Okay. What did Sergeant Kluger tell you?
Sergeant Kluger informed me that he was at the hospital at that time, and he was with a male that he described may or may not live. Later on in the night, I found out that that male was Mr. Floyd. He said he was down there at the hospital. He asked me if I would be willing to respond to the incident location of 38th in Chicago because he was tied up at the hospital at the time. He asked me if I would respond down there just to make sure, just in case we had to secure that area and make contact with any of his officers that were there on scene still, because this had the potential to be a possible critical incident.
Can you describe then what you mean by critical incident?
Usually an incident, an officer-involved incident where either the officer or somebody else has died, or an officer or somebody else has suffered great bodily harm that later led to death.
And based on your knowledge of Minneapolis Police Department policy, what is supposed to happen if there is a critical incident with the crime scene and with the participants?
A crime scene is supposed to be secured, which means locked down, and that is for the purpose to preserve any evidence that is there. The involved parties or the involved officers usually are chilling and awaiting escort sergeants so that they can be escorted to an interview room downtown. Appropriate notifications are made.
In all the years you've been working for the Minneapolis Police Department, been trained to kneel on the neck of someone who is handcuffed behind their back in a prone position?
No, I haven't.
Is that, if that were done, would that be considered force?
Absolutely.
What level of force might that be?
That would be the top tier, the deadly force.
Why?
Because of the fact that if your knee is on a person's neck, that can kill him.
Did you watch that video in its entirety?
Yes, I did.
And since then, have you had an opportunity to watch other video of the incident?
Yes.
And specifically, have you watched body-worn camera video of the incident from the involved officers?
Yes.
And based on that and your years of training and experience with the Minneapolis Police Department, you saw then Officer Chauvin with his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, correct?
Yes.
Would you call what you saw there a use of force?
Yes.
And did that use of force continue until the ambulance arrived?
Yes, it did.
Was there any change in the level of force being used until the ambulance arrived?
No.
And what do you think about that use of force during that time period?
I'm sorry?
What do you think about that use of force during that time period?
A little vague. Could you limit it to the time frame?
Right. Okay. So, based on your review of the body-worn camera videos of the incident,
yes,
and directing your attention to that moment when Mr. Floyd is placed on the ground,
yes,
what is your your view of that use of force during that time period?
Totally unnecessary.
What do you mean?
Well, first of all, pulling him down to the ground, face down, and putting your knee on the neck for that amount of time is just uncalled for. I saw no reason why the officers felt they were in danger, if that's what they felt. And that's what they would have to feel to be able to use that kind of force.
So, in your opinion, should that restraint have stopped once he was handcuffed and prone on the ground?
Absolutely.
And I should add to that question then also that it appeared he had stopped resisting.
I'm sorry?
And it appeared that he had stopped putting up any resistance.
Absolutely, I would stop.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, folks, let's hear from attorneys Natalie Jackson and Monique Presley, who joins us. And, of course, we still have our panel. I'll start with you, Monique. Your assessment of today's testimony in Day 5 of Derek Chauvin murder trial.
It was critical testimony because we are now getting to the point in the trial where they zone in on the law, on use of force, and how all use of force guidelines and protocols were violated. So it's going to be important that as we move on, that we hear from people who are on the force who know that in the same or similar situation, they would not have acted in that manner.
Natalie?
I 100% agree with Monique. This is the testimony that will prove up the murder 2 charge. In murder 2, they have to prove that not only did Derek Chauvin kill George Floyd, which is a causation issue, they also have to prove that he committed an assault and battery on George Floyd. That's what excessive force is. It means that you are using force that is illegal. Officers are allowed to use force to stop arrest. However, they can't use excessive force. So this lieutenant's testimony was critical in showing that Derek Chauvin used excessive force and thus committed a crime of assault and battery on George Floyd.
Monique, how critical is it to have a homicide detective, not somebody who's a former cop testifying for the prosecution, but an active duty police officer saying those words in front of a jury?
It's the closest we've gotten yet, as I said, to bearing down on the question that's before the jury. I agree with what Natalie said. And as I said yesterday, sure, there are lots of things that are happening that are emotional testimony that pull on the emotions, the feelings, the anger, the rage, the hurt of jurors. But at the end of the day, they're going to be instructed not to follow their emotions, but to lean on and hear the instructions of law, to apply the law, to evaluate the witnesses, and to make a determination determination of whether this officer utilized appropriate, necessary force. And we know for sure that he did not. There was one other thing that was important, though, when Sergeant Edwards was talking at the beginning of the day, giving testimony, and said that when he got on the scene, he followed protocol in asking the two involved officers to turn on their body cams. Now, what prosecution wasn't saying at that point, but I know they will say, is that those body cams never should have been off. If they were interacting with witnesses after Mr. Floyd's body, because Mr. Floyd was gone, after his body was loaded into the ambulance and taken to another location, if they spoke with witnesses, if they talked to each other while they were waiting in the cruiser, they should have had those cameras on, because they had been involved in what could have been and actually was a crime scene. So the fact that he showed up, followed protocol, told him to put them back on and then have a seat meant that he fully had sized up what was going on that scene. And then obviously others came and took over for him. But that's missing evidence. You know, that's destruction of potential evidence in time, where we have no idea what those officers were doing or what they were saying until ultimately they were examined much later on and they were taken to another location.
But that also is powerful, Natalie, because again, by having these cops testify to that, it shows the kind of reckless behavior of the officers on the scene, and that
caused the death of George Floyd, whether or not that knee on his neck caused his death, and whether or not that death was a battery, which is murder 2, or whether or not he did it with a depraved heart, which is murder 3, or whether or not it was reckless indifference, which is manslaughter.
Candace Kelly, I want to bring you in your assessment of today's testimony.
Well, listen, this is really unprecedented. You don't often have cops taking the stand and talking poorly against other cops. We even heard from his supervisor talking about him being a subordinate and leaving out parts of the story, that part being that he left his knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. So I think that this is huge. I think that this is something that jurors will look at and say, this isn't something that we see before. These people are turning on him, so to speak, and taking the stand. And then we also heard testimony that Derek Chauvin takes a continuing education class every year. And in this class, as we heard this homicide detective talk about today, they learn about this specific technique and not to do it, and the unreasonable force and what happens when it's used, that it causes death, and which is what he said on the stand right there. So, you know, we see him vociferously taking notes, Derek Chauvin. I'm not sure why he was taking notes during that time, because he's been to that class every year and knew better, but he didn't do better. As the opening statement, the prosecution, and they said, he didn't let up, he didn't get up. He didn't let up, he didn't get up. And the prosecution has had an amazing week in proving that, up till today when they let out midday.
Xavier?
Really great testimony that was there by Zimmerman, stating that once the threat level went down, then there should be some action being taken to make sure that the person is secure. Well, that didn't happen here. And it's pretty compelling to have police officers basically saying, hey, this is completely different than what's normally required on the scene to be able to secure an arrestee. So it's huge to show that they're excluding the activities of Derek Chauvin directly from what is acceptable. And you saw John Edwards, he was on the stand and he seemed visibly shaken by what was going on, even though he did a good job of walking through his testimony. So a lot of the witnesses we've seen on the stand have been emotionally shaken. And I think that has a big impact on the jury.
Monique, final comments from you and Natalie. Would you say that for the prosecution, this was a very strong opening week?
Absolutely. They did their job this week, but this is, in my estimation, the easier part of the job, in that they control their witnesses. They have well prepped their witnesses. They have a strategy in place. They're executing that strategy. There weren't really any surprises. When we start the remainder of the case, and I don't know how much longer they'll be putting on their case. They say we're going to be going until the end of April, but at whatever point it turns over to the defense, that's going to get much more difficult, because the defense is going to try to switch defendants on us and make George Floyd the defendant. So the prosecution will have to be ready for that game plan. And the only other thing that I would say is, it's important for people to understand that we don't have to prove intent here. It doesn't matter whether Chauvin intended to kill George Floyd or not, whether it's second degree, third degree, or second degree manslaughter. It is only important to show that it was a contributing cause, that it was a superseding cause is not even necessary, but one of the causes. So when the defense is saying it was drugs, it could have been. When the defense is saying it was his heart, it could have been. But would it have happened but for the knee on the neck and all of the injury and restriction of blood flow and air that caused? So that's a much easier case to prove. And if everything is right in the world, the jury will reach the right decision.
Natalie?
I think that the prosecution had a great week. I think that they weaved in their theme throughout all the witnesses. In the opening statement, Jerry Blackwell promised that there would be a bouquet of humanity, and he put that on with the witnesses who were there trying to help George Floyd. He also said that in your care is in your custody is in your care. That was a part of his theme. Didn't get up, didn't let up, as one of the other panelists said, was a part of his theme. They are proving everything that they promised the jury in opening statement, and I think that they had a banner week this week.
Natalie Jackson, Monique Presley, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have, you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it. Please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.